Hello, my name is Sutton Gardner. I am 55 years old and I have three kids. I'm married to Nicole Gardner. She's my lovely wife. Some of my favorite movies are, I'm going to start with the most profound, influential movie of my life was Rocky 1, followed by Rocky 3, followed by, I think Lonesome Dove may be tied for first place with Rocky. It depends if we consider that a movie or not. Um, so I love all those movies. Let's see what else I like. I do like some of Quentin Tarantino's movies, particularly like Reservoir Dogs. But if you're my great grandson and I'm talking to you from my deathbed, I don't want you to watch those movies. They're bad for you. Some things that are really important to me. First of all, my love of God. Um, Trying to follow what he wants for me and figure that out. That's probably the most important thing to me. Followed by my wife, whom I love with all my heart, and then my three children and my family. Those are the things that are important to me. I was born in 1971 in Pendleton, Oregon. We lived out in what we called the country, which was about 7 miles outside of Pendleton. My earliest memories are living out there. I think I was born when we lived in town, but earliest we moved out there when I was like 1 or 2. It was maybe the best childhood anybody could ever ask for. We lived out in the middle of the country. We lived down the road from a lake. My grandma lived about half a mile from us, Grandma Artis and Grandpa Bob, whom I loved very much and loved us. And it was just amazingly cool to have them around us, although I didn't really realize it at the time as a kid. But in retrospect, what a blessing that was to have two wonderful people who would do anything in the world for their grandchildren. So they lived down the road and then on 10 acres of land, and then right behind them, on another piece of 10-acre land, my cousin Richard and his older brother Keith and their mom Karen, who were all relatives of ours. I believe Karen was the daughter of one of Grandma Artis's sister. It was a big family, so I get confused who's which. But they lived right behind us, or right behind Grandma rather. So we were all grew up together, interacting with each other as a big family. It, two older brothers, Chance and Law. We were all 3 years apart. Chance was 3 years older than I was. Law was 3 years older than I was. There was a time when my Uncle Gary, my mother's brother, lived right next door to us on another 5 acres of land. And also, I believe they lived in Pendleton the whole time. I'm not sure, but my Uncle Billy and my Aunt Sherry lived close to us too. Very entertaining people, all of them. So my youngest memories growing up out there is just, being outside, running around in the country, laughing all the time, constantly. I always had I was blessed to be raised with the funniest, smartest people I've ever met in my life. All of them were unique in their own way and just hysterically funny. It goes for my cousin Alyssa, who was Sherry's daughter, who came out there often too. So yeah, that was my childhood. My first few memories were just being summer and being out in the yard with my brothers, running around and playing playing football or whatever game we were playing at the time. Having my cousins around, go on adventures every day. And Mom and Dad both worked at a place called Harris Pine Mills in Pendleton, but they didn't work on the weekends. We were always all together on the weekends. Started with my parents. We were very funny people, both of them, and I think I was also blessed. I didn't realize it at the time, but the two parents who loved me very, very much and just gave me everything I needed and more. Not just physical things I needed, but they gave me the emotional things, and like they raised me correctly. And my mom was always super loving. She was great, but she always, I was telling somebody this the other day. She told me not to feel sorry for myself and to be strong. And she kind of taught me not to worry about myself and not to be so or self-centered, but to. That's what I learned from her anyway. But to make other people around you more important. I didn't always live by that, but she did kind of instill that in me and made me aware of that. So that was really cool. She was fantastic. My father was, let's see, Elbert. Elbert, everybody always told me that he was one of the nicest people they've ever met. He was very funny, very polite. He was a very caring person. And again, it's one of those things you don't realize when you're a kid. But man, he did everything he could for his family. He worked really hard for us, bought us everything we need, went to our football games, went to all of our games, played with us. He wanted us to spend time and be fun. He seemed like he was a big kid at heart. He loved riding motorcycles. He loved, just watching us play. I don't know. I think it was probably chance when I was around 4 or 5 years old, got into martial arts. And it was a little hazy how this happened, but then I remember he wanted to learn martial arts, so smash cut to Dad buying us gis, and we had all three of us lined up in a line shoulder to shoulder in the front yard, marching next to each other, throwing punches and yelling. And my dad Sensei Elbert was teaching us how to do that, and that was the funnest thing in the world. Very funny in retrospect. I'm going to say this, I didn't appreciate him as much as I wish I had when I was younger. But he was a very loving, he was a great guy, I guess you describe him as a great guy. Some of my fondest memories, what he liked to do is he would just take me by myself, me and him would go up into the mountains sometimes. And I remember once we swam to a creek up the mountain and we swam together in the river. That was a lot of fun. He liked to do things like that. Another time, one of the best days I think in my life was he bought me a little motorcycle, and he had a motorcycle at the time too. And we drove up into the mountains and we rode just mountain trails all day long. And that was one of the funnest times in my life. He liked to do things like that. He liked to spend time with his kids on little adventures. He was very much a big kid. He loved doing things like that with us. And he was always there. He was super encouraging. He was always there when we were boxing. He was always showing interest. He'd always come to our football games. He was just a really supportive, nice person, which is an awful lot to say for somebody. He was always a really good guy. He really got super angry at us. He was always really encouraged with us, and I always knew he was really proud of us. Trying to think of a good specific story to illustrate that. One thing that popped in my mind, which probably isn't a great story, but I remember I had a bunch of friends over to my house when I was in 7th or 8th grade. And we were all in 8th grade, but we were all drinking and got a little wild that night. And I think my parents found out. And the next day he took me in the car and we were driving somewhere, and he just said, basically, and I thought I was going to get yelled at and get in big trouble, but he was very kind, and he said, that's probably not, he said, it sounds like to me you made some bad decisions last night. And you probably shouldn't do that anymore because that's not the path you want to walk. Something along those lines. But that made a big impact on me because I didn't have a lot of respect for, really anybody when I was that age. I just wanted to do what my brother did. Respected my brother. Really, didn't show that respect to anybody else. But I remember that made a dent to me. I was like, oh, he cares about me. He could have got mad and whacked me a couple times. I certainly deserved it, but he didn't. He was very kind, and he took the time to point out why that was wrong and that he wanted better for me. And he did. I can remember all through my younger life where he would stop and like take the time to tell me. One time specifically, I was living. I think I was 20 years old with him, and my car had a flat tire, and he was helping me fix it. And the whole time he was helping me fix it, he was trying to share the gospel with me. And it was just, he was somebody who like truly believed in the gospel, truly wanted to share it, and truly wanted to share it with his kids. And that's probably the best gift that father can give their kids. Like, he really wanted us to know Jesus, and he really wanted us to follow him, and he really, really believed. And like, after 55 years in this world, like, that's the only thing that matters. I mean, I've seen everything, and I've done a lot. And like, so far, like, the only thing that held true is Jesus, and that's the one real tangible thing in this world you can hold on to. And I'm super thankful, and I wish I could tell him that he spent the time. Like, I didn't make it easy for him, but he spent the time to tell me about Jesus. And so he was a great dad. I have a ton of respect for him because of that. Neither one of me and my brother made it real easy on him, but he never, gave up on us, and he always, was there for us when we needed him. And like I said, he gave us the love of Christ, which is the best thing anybody could give anybody. So, like, he was the best. So that's just my childhood, full of just amazing memories and fun adventures. I was thinking about this today. I can vividly remember both Chance and Lot trying the best they could to talk me into jumping off a double wide trailer with an umbrella, and they were both assured me that I'd be fine. I'd float down to the bottom. I can remember my mind thought, thinking, yeah, I think I can pull this off. I think I'm gonna be okay. They wouldn't have me do anything that wasn't right. But then finally I remembered, wait a second, yes, they absolutely would do that for their own laugh, so I didn't do it. But it's constantly things like that. Chance was a very sweet person. I think he'd be referred to as now as a bit of a nerd. Like, he loved like Dungeons and Dragons. He loved kind of nerdy stuff, but really smart kid. He always wanted to be a little bit different. The environment we grew up in, like the school and the town, it was always kind of hard-working, blue-collar Western town. He envisioned himself as a Hollywood actor or some like intellect. So he'd keep me up late at night to watch Monty Python with him, and all of his friends were kind of dorks who would come over and play video games, but they're all super sweet. But what I remember about Chance is I could always make him laugh, and he was super funny, but I could always make him laugh by just being goofy. He had a goofy sense of humor, so I'd spend a lot of my time just following him around and doing little pranks and gags for him and his friends to make them laugh, and that was always really fun. We were pretty close when we were kids. I loved very much, but I was always very aware that he was a different entity than me and my brother-in-law. Me and my brother-in-law were kind of one of the same. Me and Locke liked to play football together. We were always really close. We would box all the time. I really looked up to him. He was super talented at things he did. Played guitar. We always didn't get along real well, but we were super close. He was 3 years older than me, and he was a great brother. Let's see, what else? So most of my memories of just being a kid is running around outside, playing, laughing, having a great time with either my brothers or my cousins. I think anybody would have loved that childhood. I didn't realize what I had until I grew up and got older and kind of looked back and see what a lucky person I was to have all those people around. Every holiday was, we'd have, all the family around. It just seemed like we just laughed all day long and played, and it was great. Grandma Artist lived down the road from us. She was just such a wonderful person, but Grandma could talk more than anybody I've ever met in my life. she was constantly talking. It irritated my brother so much in the funniest way. They were just, um, they would tease her constantly about how she talked. And Grandma Artist loved her family too. She came from a family of 12 brothers and sisters, and she's just infatuated with us being part of the family, and that drove both Chance and Law crazy. She would constantly bring some people over to our house without without us knowing, and she'd bring these people over and their kids, and she'd ask us to like entertain these people that we've never met before. And it was just super funny to see Law always go up to her and like try to tell us like, I don't know who these people are. Why do you keep bringing these people over to my house? What am I supposed to do with them? These are the weirdest people in the world. Anyway, it was very funny. And he would do that just so there weren't bad people, just to aggravate Grandma. And she would smile and return, smile back at him and say, well, they're your family. Law and Law would say, well, I don't even know who they are. They're not my family. I forgot. He'd like often say like, they're the cousin of your mailman's, fourth brother or whatever or something. And she got so, she didn't get mad, but he got mad. He would just argue. And it was one of the funniest things I'd watch as a kid, because Law loved to argue. Both of them did, but Grandma would argue with a smile, and Law would argue, and he'd get so mad, get red in the face. And so much fun to go and walk in the front room and see them like Law yelling at him, like red faced and yelling at Grandma, and Grandma would just smile at him. But they also really loved each other. They did get along real well. I don't want to paint that they're always fighting. They weren't, but they were very strong-willed people, both of them. Chance, on the other hand, would aggravate Grandma in a different way. One of the most classic stories where we were all together in Logandale, staying with Grandma Artist and Grandpa Bob, and that's where a lot of Grandma Artist's relatives lived, in Logandale. We've been there for 3 weeks maybe, and so we were little kids. We were, ready to go home, and maybe at the end of our good behavior, if we had any to start with. So the day came that we were going to drive all the way back from Logandale back to Pendleton. So Grandma put us in this small little car, but before we could leave Logandale, we had to go to each of her relatives' house, and she made us say goodbye to all of them. And we did that. We were fine for the first like one person. Second one, third one, Chance started getting a little annoyed and started asking like how many people we're going to have to see, and like why did we have to see every person had ever seen a Lanny before. And then I forgot what he said, like, why don't you just put a bullhorn on top of the car so we can say goodbye to everybody? And then that made Law start laughing, and then they both got into it, started making fun of Grandma. And so finally, like, this went on for like an hour, not 2 hours. And at that point, Chance and Law were both laughing hysterically, making fun of Grandma and the fact the way to stop at all these people's houses. Then finally we left, and finally we left town, started driving home. We got about 30 miles outside of town, and both Law and Chance were making fun of Grandma, and to the point where she was finally starting to get a little angry. She pulled over on the side of the road. She had to get out and get a breath of fresh air because she was getting a little angry. And as soon as she got out of the car, Chance or Law, I forget which one, locked the door. And it was probably 110 degrees in the middle of summer in the Nevada desert. And they started cackling like little hyenas back there. They thought that was the funniest thing in the world. And I realized that I wasn't going to get in trouble, so I was laughing too. But then I realized that somebody's going to get in trouble at some point, and I was a participant in this. So eventually, I think I started trying to talk them into opening up the car door. I don't remember, but I remember her outside of the car and saying she's going to call my parents and make them come down and get us. And Chance said, "Good, do it. I want to drive home with them instead." And that was quite funny. So that was a good episode, and that was a capsule of the things that kind of happened back then. Chance and Law would constantly egg each other on and laugh at each other and get in all sorts of trouble like that. Let me think what else they did. I think it was always really fun to be around them. Even then, those times where people were a little upset, it was always fun. It was always, jovial. There was never any like real bad feelings involved. Everybody was happy and laughing, and it was just a great childhood. Great to grow up and be raised out there. One specific time I remember was me and my cousin Richard were outside one day, and Law and Keith, who was Richard's older brother, came home and said that they're a little worried that there might be a Bigfoot that lived down by the reservoir. And me and Richard were very interested and a little scared about that. And we're like, well, why do you think there's a Bigfoot? And they said, well, we found Bigfoot tracks. Being 7 or 8 years old, we thought, well, that sounds reasonable. We live out in the country. There's probably Bigfoots down there. So they took us out in the middle of this field that was between us and the lake. And there was an old abandoned car, rusted out car that was out there. And around this car was big, giant Bigfoot prints everywhere. And anyway, so they told us that there's been a couple of, I think, abductions or murders out there too that we didn't know about. And since we didn't have news or the internet, we just believed them. And so for about a week we were terrified. That's all me and Richard talked about, and me and my cousin Richard talked about. And we were very concerned that we were going to get captured by Bigfoot. So finally Law got bored of the whole thing and told us that he's the one that did it all. And he was very lackluster when he did. He just got tired of the joke and told us there were no Bigfoots. I was very disappointed in that. But so her life was just little things like that. Brother Law played a lot of sports. Him and I played football together. So Law played sports, Law played baseball. So a lot of my memories were going down and watching him play baseball. It was so much fun to do those. So I'd drive down with Grandma Artis and Cousin Rich, and we'd go to Law's baseball games, and that was always fun. Chance and Law had a funny relationship too. They really loved each other, but they also were very competitive and extremely very different people. They're always almost getting into fights. And one of the funniest things I can remember was Chance came home one day. I remember being out in the front yard. And me and Law were out in the front yard playing whatever we were doing. And Mom took Chance into town to get a haircut. And Chance got out of the car, and it was late 70s, and his hair was like feathered back and out on side and real long. He had these mirror sunglasses on, and he thought he was the coolest person in the world. And he got out of the car, and Law looked at him and said, "You look like you have a cobra head." Because his head was sticking out, and that made Chance super angry. And anyway, they got into an actual big fight at that time. It was super funny. But for months after that, anytime there was any problems, Law would call him Cobra Head, and they'd start fighting again. That was great. It was great for me. Anyway, I think it was in, let's see, I was 12 years old, 7th grade, and when we finally, all of us wanted to move in the town. We didn't want to live out in the country anymore. For some reason, I think I did, but my brothers wanted to move in the town, and so I thought I wanted to move in town. It was kind of the theme of my life. Whatever they wanted to do, I thought I wanted to do, which took me a long time to figure out that's actually not true. But we finally moved into town in like 82, 83, and we moved into a house right next to a park in Pendleton, and Chance was getting ready to graduate from high school at the time. Law was, I think, in 8th or 9th grade, I believe. And that was great. We lived in a nice little town next to a park, or a nice little house next to a park. And life changed quite a bit. When we lived out in the country, we never really watched TV at all. We just had 3 channels. And the only time we watched TV was after school. We'd go home and we'd watch Star Trek or something together, but rarely did we watch any TV. We moved into towns at the same time. My parents got cable, and we thought that was fantastic. Our lives were going to change, and I was just getting ready to start junior high. So it was a really kind of a fun time. That life changed dramatically for us at that time. One day, in our house there, we had a big backyard. Right behind our backyard was a creek called Mackay Creek. Anyway, I'd go in the backyard sometimes, just play around. We had this old punching bag, and I'd fight with the punching bag, pick it up and throw it around, and just being a dork. And I remember looking across the river and seeing this kid across the river. I was in 7th grade, and anyway, it was turned out to be my friend Lance Robinson, who lived across the street, and we stared at each other for a couple of months, and then we finally met each other, and he turned out to be a very good friend of mine. And his older sister, Lori, wound up marrying my older brother Law. I started junior high. I still felt like I was this country kid, even though Pendleton was like 15,000 people. It was a real small town. to us it felt like a big city, so I was pretty nervous to start junior high. Um, but I had my in Pendleton, junior high, 7th grade to ninth grade. So Law was in ninth grade there. And everybody at that time really, Law had quite a reputation for being a good athlete, a good guitar player. Like everybody really liked him and looked up to him a lot. So I had the ability to start junior high. People who didn't know me knew that I was Law's little brother. So I, got a little clout from that. People just, you know, gave me a chance, I guess, and I made a lot of really nice new, not nice, but I made a lot of new friends, a lot of good people, and life really changed at that point. But no longer did my life just consist of playing with my cousins and my brothers and out at my grandma's. Had a whole new batch of friends, and it came, that became more important to me than probably anything. Had a ton of friends. I loved just hanging out with them. We live next to a park, so I think most of my days we just go over to the park and play football and goof around, and it was really great. Like I said, my friend Lance, who lived right behind me, we came super close, and I don't think a day went by where one of us weren't at the other person's house. And I got to meet all Lance's friends, and he met some of my friends, and we had this big gaggle of people that all hung out together and grew up together. And, those people are still some of the closest people to me ever. These people I grew up with from like 7th grade to graduated high school with. I don't think people. I've had a lot of friends since then, but I don't know anybody as well as I know those people. I don't, care for people like I do those bunch of people that I grew up with back there. We went through a lot of ups and a lot of downs together, all of us. And the term wild doesn't begin to describe it, but we were very wild kids who really didn't have a lot of rules, but we never did anything malicious or bad, but we just had an awful lot of fun. So that's all I really remember about junior high was just a lot of nice people, a lot of good friends, laughing a lot, just starting to become very social and, that whole aspect of my life. But it was very different, and I still remember kind of feeling like almost like a fish out of water. Like I was still more of a country kid at heart. I just really, wanted to, be outside, out in the country doing things. But I had a good time. Right in 7th grade, though, Chance moved away. Chance moved finally. He always wanted to leave Pendleton, so he finally did. He left Pendleton and moved to Los Angeles, I believe. And that was weird for me. That was the first real big change outside of moving to the town that we had when he left. I don't think he was with us too long. I think like in 7th grade, when I was in 7th grade, is when he moved away. And just from a handful of times, I didn't really see him too much more for the up until now. A couple of times I'd go down and visit him, but we really kind of drifted apart. He always wanted, like I said, always wanted to live that LA lifestyle and be something different, and he became something different. So he left. But during that time, me and Law, we were always really close, but we became, really close. I started being aware of how much he was, he kind of wanted to look after me and take care of me and make sure that people were, be nice to me or whatever in school. And, he taught me a lot about life. He always watched out for me, and he was probably the closest person I've ever had in my life. We didn't have a relationship where we kind of talk about that, but when we were always alone and together, like he was, I always knew that he really wanted the best for me, and he really cared a lot about me. And so we became real close during that time. And then not too long after that, maybe in 8th or 9th grade, I think, my parents moved to Portland or Beaverton for a couple of years. So Law and I moved up to Portland and Beaverton, and that was completely different. I didn't know anybody going to a giant school. Of course, Law had girlfriends and friends right away. So that at the point I got where he wasn't home very much. He was out an awful lot. But we did do every day is we started boxing when we were up in Portland. And so every day I would come home and Law would pick me up and he would drive me about 20 minutes up to the boxing gym and we'd spend 3 hours there a night. I'm doing that. And that was a lot of fun. The only reason I did that is because Law did that. In retrospect, I thought I liked it, but I hated it. I hate fighting. I never liked any of it, but I always did it because he did it. I did most of the things in my life at that time because he did it. But it was really cool. I loved it. We'd go out there, we'd run, we'd work out, got in great shape, and I got to watch him. He was really good at that, boxing. So we did that for a couple of years. I didn't really like Portland very much. It was just too big. I didn't understand the people real well. You know, they were more big city people, and I got along and met friends and girlfriends and all that, but didn't really care for it too much. I always, when I left Pendleton, I realized like, oh, I like that a lot, and I just wanted to go back. And we stayed in Portland for a couple of years. Didn't do too much outside of boxing, and met a couple of people. But then we moved back to Pendleton. I think I was at this point maybe a sophomore in high school. So we moved back, and oddly enough, when we moved back to Pendleton, we moved back to the exact same house we lived at when we left the country. We moved into Pendleton. Somehow the same house that we bought then was up for rent, so we moved in there and we rented that house. He said at that point I was in high school and Law was done with high school, but still living with us, if I remember correctly. It's a little hazy. Or he lived sometime in Portland and he'd come back and stay with sometime. And those times were some of the funnest times of my life because I'd moved back and had all my close friends. Lance still lived behind us. High school to me was, didn't do a lot of schoolwork, wasn't a great student, didn't take it seriously at all. It was just a place to go and hook up with my buddies and to plan what we're going to do that night and on the weekends. But still, some of the funnest times. High school was great. Like I said, I wasn't a good student, but man, I had a lot of fun. I met a lot of good people. Like I'm still close with today. Don't remember doing anything too positive. I remember still, at this point in my life, I did understand that there was a God. And I want to kind of go back to one wonderful thing that my mother gave me, and that was probably the best, that's the best gift that any mother can give their child, is she talked to me a lot about God. When we were kids, when we lived out in the country, they were Seventh-day Adventists, and I think that was my first introduction to, I shouldn't say that was my first introduction to organized religion, but I've always believed that like being out in the country, and like those quiet days in the country, being by myself, or just a couple people walking around outside and looking out, seeing how nature works, being around animals, like I instinctively understood that there was something made all of this. I feel like anybody who's honest can look outside and watch the world for a little while, and I could see the fingerprints of God. So I always kind of understood that there was a God. I didn't think about it too much, but I certainly understood it. My parents were Seventh-day Adventists when I was a real little kid, and they went to the Seventh-day Adventist church, and it was the dorkiest group of people I've ever seen in my life. And that was like where a lot of the comedy from my brother came from, because my parents would take us to to the Seventh-day Adventist church. They'd put us in these little suits, and they'd make me and Law go to Seventh-day Adventist school or like Bible study, whatever, while they were in church. And it was the weirdest bunch of people I've ever met in my life. And then like every Sunday we had to go to this potluck. And the only reason I went to the potluck so I could hear my brother make fun of all the people at the potluck, because none of them ate any meat. They were all vegetarian, and they all looked like they'd never had an ounce of protein in their life. And so that was a great comedy gold for my brother to constantly make fun of all these people who, how strange they were, how weird they were. And anyway, so I don't remember when my parents left being a Seventh Day Adventist and became more Christian, but they did. And this is a very cool thing that I hope they realize that not a lot of parents would do that. That they earnestly believe in Jesus Christ, and they earnestly tried to tell us about it, try to tell us about Him, and they did. They told us about that Jesus came to this earth and died for our sins. They did that, and I couldn't be more appreciative and thankful that they did do that. And I give a lot of credit to my father too, who, at the time when I was in high school, we had a lot of good times because we didn't have a lot of rules, and I was as wild as all of us were. It's just kind of the nature of Pendleton, like there's no rules, and we were on 24/7. And it was one of the nagging things in the back of my mind was I started to realize like what I'm doing, the things I'm doing, are probably not right. They weren't, you know, they weren't very Christian. And that's kind of during those times in later high school years when I started to realize, when I actually started having those thoughts like, maybe this isn't the way I'm supposed to be living my life. Maybe drinking constantly and just being out partying all the time isn't. I was having a good time, but I wouldn't say I was happy. I wasn't happy. I started having those thoughts for the first time in my life. Like, there's got to be something more to this. There's got to be something more than seeing how many beers we can drink, smoking cigarettes, and meeting girls. I did feel like there was something missing in my life, and just starting to think there was something more out there. So that was the first time those thoughts were going through my mind, and we got to the point at the end of high school. The only thing I really learned how to do was, drink beer, smoke cigarettes, meet girls. I was really good at all of those things. None of them made me that happy. I really didn't know much more about life or what I was supposed to do with that. So I left high school. I dropped out, I think, when I was about 16 or 17 years old. Law had moved down to San Diego. I think I must have been 18, 17. Law had moved to San Diego, and I just didn't want to be in school anymore. And I got to the point where it was like I didn't want to really keep partying and doing all that. There was nothing left for me in Pendleton. So Law called me and asked me to move down to San Diego with them. Not having anything going on, I was like, yeah, sure, I'll be right down. And Mom bought me a plane ticket, and I flew down to San Diego, and my brother picked me up in an airport, and we started living our lives in a single room, what do they call them, studio apartments in San Diego. So I was, I think, like 17 or 18 years old, and Law must have been 20 or 21. And we were two country kids living in the middle of a big city with no jobs, nothing going on. And I'm not sure why he chose San Diego. I think maybe Chance might have been down there or something. I think Chance and Law were still pretty close, so I really wasn't with Chance. But I was with Law, so we moved down there, and those years are a blur. I just kind of went from one job to the next. We didn't really, a lot of time going to the beach, surfing, swimming. It was, again, a good time, but it wasn't a very productive time. I didn't really do much of anything. And again, I'd also remember at that point starting to realize, like, okay, I need to start trying to figure this life thing out.